FromSoftware did something with this game that they've never done with any other title prior. They released a true ranked mode for Elden Ring NIGHTREIGN called the Deep of Night. This is a hardcore, more challenging mode, and I'm going to level with you. I've done pretty much nothing with my life in the last week except play the Deep of Night and grind, going all the way to depth 5. And so throughout all of my experience, I've been able to notice all of the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to this game mode. And I wanted to make sure that I waited just a little bit and didn't review it right away, because with Elden Ring NIGHTREIGN, pretty much when any major patch has come out, a second minor patch to add adjustments to that comes out usually within the week or at least a couple of days after, and they've already made a handful of changes to the Deep of Night as a mode, and a couple of those newer changes address some issues that I had with the mode before, but not all of them. So today I want to talk about what works about this mode, the Deep of Night, what I don't really care for, and what straight up just does not belong or does not work whatsoever. Alright, let me just real quick summarize what exactly the Deep of Night is and how you unlock it. For those unfamiliar, if you haven't already beaten all 8 Night Lords in NIGHTREIGN, you need to complete all of those before you even unlock the Deep of Night. But once you've beaten the base game, you now have access to this mode in which you start at depth 1. And in depth 1, it's basically the equivalent of New Game Plus 1 scaling, more or less. Like, the enemies hit a tad harder, but also have the ability to be a little more powerful, especially with the new additions of the relic slots. You'll have access to a whole other selection of deep relics that include these 3 attached to your original 3 that you can run in the base game, and that only apply in this mode. They don't retroactively go back to the base game, but this gives you even more options for customization and choosing how you want to play a certain character. But additionally, not only do you have access to new relics that both come with an upside and a downside, but you have a new weapon type in the game, these cursed unique weapons that are outlined with a red border. These weapons usually come with 2 upsides as perks, but typically 1 downside depending on what it is. And these downsides can range from anything just a minor nuisance to something so important that even despite having an amazing weapon, you might not want to run it because it could do more harm than good, essentially. So it really adds this whole other layer of decision making, and it really tests your ability to craft builds, making sure that you have mastery of the character that you're playing, and requires a game knowledge to really go into the later depths. And otherwise, the expeditions are kind of the same. There's no new Night Lords as of yet. However, there are these special red enemy types that always drop some piece of cursed equipment. These can range from anything just like regular, small enemies that you'll find in encampments. They could be stuff in certain POIs, or they could even be Everjail bosses. Now, these red enemies are interesting because they are much stronger than average, and they do give you more runes, but I have a couple of issues with the implementation of these enemies, which I'll discuss later. But just know that these are here to switch up the game a little bit. An enemy that you thought you knew or maybe knew how to fight before is still the same, but it's going to be significantly tougher to take down and is going to hit much harder as well. Also, not to mention, which enemies are red and which aren't can vary from expedition and are never the same. But that's pretty much the premise, right? You got new options for building your character and your relic, loadout. You also have new options for weapons and what you choose to run in-game, and you've got tougher enemies. That's essentially it. And the way it works is you have your first depth, which is not too much harder than the base game, all the way up to depth 5, which can be a literal nightmare. Now, I've gotten into depth 5, and I've played expeditions in 5 solo and co-op, and let me tell you, they are vastly different than one another, and that's one of my key issues. However, let's first talk about the good about this mode and what I think it really gets right. Firstly, this is a new and fresh challenge for experienced players who have mastered the game, because when NIGHTREIGN came out, I was absolutely addicted, and in a lot of ways still am, but you get to a point with the same 8 Night Lords where you really figure them out, right? And you have no trouble on expeditions. Your success rate goes up to like 99, maybe 100%. This is for those players, the kinds of people that literally never lose and are looking for a little bit more of a challenge, and at least insofar as that is concerned, I think it accomplishes that. However, I think the implementation could do with some tweaking, and we'll get into that later. But needless to say, it is an addicting gameplay loop. It's a lot of fun and breathes some fresh life into people who have already mastered this game. Another thing I absolutely love is the extra added layer of depth to a mode that was already challenging to begin with, but now you need to double how much you think about your relic choices and what weapons you choose choose or not choose to run in game, because your build and the way that your character interacts with them and the Night Lords can vary greatly depend on what your relic choices are and what weapons you choose to run in game. And I think in the earlier depths, you get a little more leeway with experimentation, and there's actually quite a lot you can do with these new cursed weapons and combining them to make, these crazy combinations for your build. And you can do like, Revenant strength builds, you can do Raider intelligence builds. I mean, you can do that in the base game too, but it's significantly more interesting here because of all of the additional upsides and downsides that not only the relics, but also the in-game weapons get as well. Traditionally in Souls games, if you wanted to do a challenge run or, challenge yourself in some way, it was typically self-imposed, right? It was something that you would do to yourself, a level 1 run or, like a fist-only run, just something crazy that is self-imposed. This is the first time that we've gotten a challenge mode that is FROMSOFTWARE doing it. It's not self-imposed. You can still play the game however you want to. You can use whatever weapons you like. And it's a way to sort of get the difficulty of challenge runs without like having to self-impose some kind of restriction on yourself. So I think it's an interesting foray because they've never really gone and done something like that before with one of their games, and this is breaking new ground for them. And let me just say before I go any further and get into my critiques is this mode is addicting. I feel like I've almost put more time specifically into the Deep of Night than I have even the base game. It's extremely fun and satisfying and addicting grinding for ranks. Every time you win an expedition, you gain anywhere from 200 to 300 points, and crawling through depth 1, getting to 2, 3, 4, and even 5 feels really satisfying to make that push. However, the implementation of the way that the rank system works, I think, is certainly up for a little bit of scrutiny. Now, before I made this video, they actually did release a patch that changed a little bit of how ranked works. Like, for example, there's now loss protection, which prevents you from dipping below a certain depth that you've already acquired, and that was not there from the beginning, but it is now. However, I don't know if this is really quite the good or the best solution for what the problem is, because once you get to stuff like depths 3, 4, and 5, let's say that you're in depth 5, but you want to go back and try something out in depth 2 or 3, you actually can't do that. You cannot access these depths again. What you can do, and this is what they added in the update, is you have this ability to like de-rank, so you can go back 1 depth with no way to like restore where you were in that point forward. So you can choose to de-rank yourself 1 depth, but I don't really know why you would voluntarily do that exactly. I mean, unless you're just getting smoked in the depth and it's too hard for you, that's, I guess, a way to get through the loss protection thing. But it just seems weird that if you've unlocked all of these depths and if you're at 5, you should have the ability to choose what depth you want to play in. Obviously, it won't like count towards your rank still, but you should be able to access these depths again, because there's stuff that I want to try in depths 1 or 2, but I simply cannot access anymore. Another thing is that the ranking system itself, whether it's solo or co-op, is kind of brutal because you get 200 points for completing an expedition, and you get 300 if there is a modifier applied. These modifiers can be something like the map information missing, so you might start out in a game and not really be able to see any of the POIs, or you could have a modifier like this that when you begin the expedition, it won't tell you what the Night Lord is, because it'll just randomly select one for you when you start an expedition. You don't get to choose who you go after, and this one makes it so that it's unknown until you pretty much literally walk through the boss door, and you get 300 points for beating that expedition. And honestly, that's fine. That's not my problem. I'm totally okay with that. Like 200 for normal, 300 for a modifier. My problem is actually the way that they handle the Everdarks, because as you know, they added these new versions of the Night Lords like post-launch. These Everdark bosses are in effect a phase 3 for that Night Lord, and these range anywhere from brutally harder to like honestly easier than its base boss. They're kind of all over the place, but the problem is the Everdarks do not give you any more points than a regular one, and that can be fine under certain conditions, right? Like the Dark Drift Knight, there's not much difference between him. In fact, I would make the argument that his Everdark is an easier version than the base, but something like Caligo or Everdark Caligo, forget about it. The Sentient Pest, that's basically the newborn baby versus hydrogen bomb. And to make matters worse, there's literally no way to tell in-game throughout your entire match as you're making your build and surviving the other 2 nights. You cannot know if it's going to be Everdark or regular, and you might say that that's a good thing because it's part of the challenge, challenge, but I don't think having the difference between Libra and Everdark Libra or Sentient Pest and the Everdark Pest is fair, and you can't even prepare for it throughout your match, and you don't get any more points if it is Everdark, which is significantly harder than if it's not. I just think that there should either be more point compensation if you complete an expedition against an Everdark, or there should be some kind of way to tell in-game about what boss you're going to be fighting, whether it's Everdark or not. Maybe clearing a certain POI gives you a hint of which version it's going to be, just because the experiences can vary so widely between the two, and getting compensated in terms of rewards equally for them just doesn't seem right. Now, one of my biggest praises for the Deep of Night is I said how much that it encourages new play styles and experimentation with the relics and in-game weapon perks and all the new, cursed weapon types and all that stuff. And I think that's true for about the first 3 depths. Once you get to 4 and 5, I honestly think the viable playstyles actually start to shrink again. Like, compared to the base game, depths 1, 2, and 3 with all of the new weapon types and relics, the game really opens up to you, and you have all of these new decisions to make and ways to play your character that maybe you hadn't done before. But as soon as you get to 4 and 5, the amount of viable playstyles really starts to decline, because you have to start running certain things to make those expeditions doable. Particularly, you pretty much always have to run weapons and keep them in your inventory, stuff that has damage negation perks, whether it's damage negation at full HP, which is literally the most important one, or successive attacks negate damage. It's like you need all of these damage negating things, because virtually everything in depth 4 and 5 will one-shot you if you don't have these, and even they will still one-shot you even if you do have them a lot of the time. I would say that in my experience, depths 1, 2, and 3, you can pretty much use whatever the game gives you and play how you want, but in depths 4 and 5, you now have to start playing what you have to run, the things that you need to have to complete an expedition. And I don't know about you guys, but at least in 4 and 5, I found myself playing the exact same playstyle more or less every single time in 4 and 5, because I'm just looking for damage negation stuff, and there's really not as much variety game to game when you get to these higher depths, because it's just, that's what it demands of you. And actually, while we're on that topic, I would say that the same is true even of characters. I mean, I main Wilder anyway. I just like playing him because you can pretty much make anything work. That's what's fun about this character. And also his Sixth Sense ability, which allows you to withstand a fatal hit, I feel like is pretty much required for at least grinding to depth 5, because, watching his Sixth Sense trigger when you're at full HP at level like 13 or 14 is honestly kind of hilarious, but that just shows, how much everything literally one-taps you in 4 and 5. But the point is, other characters like Revenant or Raider, honestly, or Guardian even, don't stand a chance in depth 5. Not that you literally can't play them, but you know what I mean. And it's also quite different in co-op versus solo. If you're soloing depth 5 with Recluse or like Guardian or Revenant, I mean, you might as well just turn off your computer, bro. Literally go outside and do anything else, because it's just not happening. But I just think that the character viability in solo particularly is not really there. Even like Raider, who is amazing in the base game, and his entire playstyle is really centered around trading damage. But if you trade damage in depths 4 and 5, you're dead. And that's pretty much that's just flat out how it is. So Raider, I think, went from one of the better characters in the game to honestly maybe one of the worst in the Deep of Night, just because of the way the scaling works. He doesn't really get much damage negation from his ability like you would expect him to, and Revenant's summons get obliterated like they're alchemy dust. Now, the things that are most dangerous in the Deep of Night are, of course, the red enemies that are beefed up, have more health, and hit harder. And again, I'm fine with those as a concept, and honestly, in most cases, they're all right for the game. But the problem is their implementation, whether it be Everjails or even like POI bosses, is, at least in my opinion, these red bosses, for the most part, do not give you the, proportionate reward for the challenge that they present. Obviously, they have much higher health, and they hit harder, all that good stuff, and they do give you more runes, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that the time investment that you need to spend killing these red enemies in most cases is actually worth it against a non-red enemy. For example, if you hit an Everjail and you get a Dragonkin soldier, just a regular one, that's, he's a little tanky, but he's fine to take down. But if you get a red one, it's going to take you much longer to kill, but you don't really get a proportionate reward for the extra time that it's going to take for you to kill him. And that's a big issue, especially in solo. Now, I will say another small issue I think is the balancing between co-op and solo. Particularly in co-op games, you're probably going to find that even in depth 5, if you have a semi-competent team, you are going to absolutely steamroll the first 2 nights. Really, there's no challenge to, getting through the map, getting good weapons. You'll probably clear the entire board, be level 15 before the second night even closes in. However, it's the Night Lord that presents the real challenge for co-op because the health bars are so tanky in co-op, and if one person is not dealing enough damage or lagging behind, then it's going to feel like an absolute slog. However, it's kind of the inverse in solo, where the first 2 nights are actually a real threat, and there is a high probability in the later depths that you don't even make it to the Night Lord, depending on like what weapons you get throughout the match, or even what nighttime bosses you get. But the boss fight itself, by the time you get to the Night Lord, if you know what you're doing, you might be able to guarantee victory a little bit easier than if you were playing co-op, if that makes sense. My point is the balancing can be a little wonky, and it's kind of misleading to feel like you're extremely overpowered in the first couple of nights in Limveld, and then you go and fight the Night Lord and your entire team gets smoked, or if you feel like you're underpowered playing solo and you go in and actually, destroy the Night Lord without really expecting to. So that is something I think to look at, but let's get into the major issues, the tarnished, the ugly with Night Rain, and unfortunately it's the things that I feel are the worst aspects of the mode that could be adjusted. Let's just address the elephant in the room. There are no rewards at all for playing the Deep of Night and beating it and or getting to depth 5. There is literally nothing. No in-game skins. I mean, there's this little like icon you get on your banner or whatever. I mean, that doesn't really count as a reward. You don't get any special relics. Matter of fact, I thought it would have been an excellent idea that if you reach depth 5, you should be given this special, relic chalice or something that is all prismatic, because one of my biggest issues with the relic system, especially for somebody who's a more experienced player, is you get to a point where you have literally hundreds of relics of all different colors and they get very disorganized. And I think having the colored system for what relics you can select makes sense for your first few hours of gameplay when you only have a handful of relics. But once you hit that critical mass where you have literally hundreds and you have all these different chalice combinations and color, you may as well not even have colors segmented at all at that point. You may as well not even divide them. And I felt that a perfect reward for reaching depth 5 is that they just give you a chalice with 6 prismatic slots so that you can just select whatever you want. I mean, you pretty much already can anyways, in effect, so you might as well just make it a reward. Okay, but if not any special relic rewards, how about an in-game skin for your character for reaching depth 5? Well, that'd be great, but nope, there's none of that either. I mean, I'm pretty sure they'll probably add more cosmetics or some kind of skin in the DLC whenever they release that, but it does seem weird to have this Deep of Night ranked mode and not have some kind of cosmetic as a reward for reaching depth 5. And I'm not saying they need to go crazy with it and add hundreds of cosmetics and all these skins from old Dark Souls games and stuff like that. I don't think I even want that, but something to at least signify that you've gone to the upper ranks, and maybe even just a slightly different color nameplate when you're playing co-op would be something to signify, what it is. But there's really no rewards to play for, and if that's something that's important to you, then unfortunately the Deep of Night will feel hollow in that way. You could say that the grind itself is rewarding, and accessing these deeper depths and getting these victories itself is a reward, and to some degree that is true. I think the gameplay is rewarding enough to justify playing it on its own, but still, it would be nice to have at least a little something to remember it by. And I thought there was a chance they might address this in the update they released for the Deep of Night to add some kind of minor reward for, reaching this, but they really didn't, so that was slightly disappointing. But another issue is that playing co-op, at least in my opinion, is borderline unplayable at certain moments. I mean, I think the lack of online functionality for Night Rain definitely shows a little bit, and this becomes a major issue when trying to communicate in-game, especially with how precise builds need to be to work together as a cohesive team in Night Rain. But also, there's really no way to prevent people from rage quitting, which will then, screw over your game and cause you to lose tons of rank, potentially hours of progress that you've made if you lose 700 points after your match. I found co-op to be extremely tedious and honestly frustrating. Now, in my opinion, I think they're using NIGHTREIGN as sort of a testing bed for features that they may include later in a future title called the Duskbloods, which is primarily a PvP-focused online game. And so everything with the ranking system and the way that the co-op functionality works, I still think has a little bit of ways to go in order to catch up with modern games as far as like infrastructure and technology goes. And so co-op was a nightmare, and I spent most of my time in Deep of Night playing solo, and I started to realize that at depths 4 and 5, when you're getting like one shot by virtually everything, I was starting to question if I was even having fun anymore, if I was enjoying it. I think I was, but at the same time, I feel I can look back now and say that I feel depth 3 is probably the most enjoyable because it's a good mix of still allowing you to experiment and use what you want in game, but it's still a fair challenge and certainly much more challenging than the base game, whereas depths 4 and 5, require you to play a very strict meta, and you sort of had to treat them like no hit runs, especially if you can't find damage negation perks throughout the course of your match, which does happen quite frequently, by the way. Now, I remember before the Deep of Night came out, the article was saying that there's an endless mode once you get to 4 and 5, and we've reached that obviously, and there is no endless mode once you reach these lower depths. And I think that was basically just like a translation error. You can infinitely keep ranking up once you hit depth 5, but there isn't an endless mode as in like an in-game challenge. That doesn't really exist. So that was something that I feel like we expected that, obviously didn't pan out in the way just because it was roughly translated from Japanese, but that is, something as well. Depth 5 is basically the same as depth 4, just slightly harder. Now, despite me being fairly critical throughout most of this video, I want to say that NIGHTREIGN Deep of Night is fantastic. I actually love this mode. It's awesome. I wish there was a few features that allowed me to enjoy it more thoroughly, and accessing other depths would be able to help once you've unlocked them, but still, despite that, I enjoyed the fresh challenge, and it did shake up the game in a way that makes it more interesting. Unfortunately, they really still have the same expeditions and loot pools and all that. Like, they don't really take the gloves off when it comes to making the game weird and wacky in a way that they could. They don't add any new, previous Dark Souls bosses or anything, which maybe they will in the DLC, but that is, still yet to happen. It's the most I've wanted to grind a video game in quite a long time, and it does feel satisfying to reach those later depths. But if you're somebody who really is reward driven and likes getting rewards specifically, for ranked modes and gameplay and stuff like that, then this may not be the one for you because there is a shocking lack of rewards for actually playing. But anyways, that's pretty much it. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you in the next one.